Apart from other Shakespearean antagonists like Iago, Macbeth, or Claudius, Aaron is perhaps one of the most ruthless villains you can find in Shakespearean drama. He is the antagonistic Moor that you find in the tragedy Titus Andronicus. He certainly proves himself to be quite a destructive force through the entire course of the play. Aaron manages to convince even Titus Andronicus to amputate his own arm, falsely claiming that it was the only way to save his own sons from Saturninus. Soon we find that it's actually Aaron who chops off the left arm of Titus Andronicus. Like Iago, Aaron is also quite a persuasive character. This fact is proven to be true because it is actually the Moor who convinces Tamora's sons, Demetrius and Chiron, to rape and mutilate the only daughter of Titus, Lavina. It is also worth noting that Tamora and Aaron do have a baby together because of their secret love affair. When we get to the end of the play, Lucius, the son of Titus Andronicus, becomes the emperor of Rome. Lucius orders Aaron to be buried chest deep somewhere beyond the city walls, and he is actually abandoned there to die of thirst and starvation. Women in Shakespeare's dramas are often depicted as strong and outspoken. This was not exactly the case with regard to the role of women in the 16th and 17th centuries. Beatrice is a great example of a Shakespearean heroine who is young, beautiful, bold, and not to mention virtuous. She is educated and much more intelligent than the other women in her own company. Her witty dialogues are sharp and at times malicious. Beatrice can be seen as a complete contrast or an antithesis to Hero, her own cousin. Shakespeare pairs Beatrice with another interesting character in the play who happens to be Benedick. The plot is made more interesting when we come to realize that both Benedick and Beatrice share the same disdain and aversion towards marriage. The entire play revolves around the prospect of these two characters falling in love with each other, and that is how the drama comes to an end, with these two characters becoming a happy couple. The Bard is known for creating some of the most memorable characters in world literature, and Sir John Falstaff is certainly a unique individual. It is believed that Shakespeare based the character of Falstaff on the historical figure John Oldcastle, whose life is documented by Holinshed in his chronicles. We find Falstaff being a character in 3 of Shakespeare's plays, which include Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, as well as The Merry Wives of Windsor. We do hear about him in an elegy that is played in Henry V, but we do not get to see Falstaff appearing on the stage. It is also told that it was Lord Cobham, one of the descendants of John Oldcastle, who forced Shakespeare to change the name to Falstaff. Other Shakespearean scholars do suggest that Shakespeare derived the name from the historical knight Sir John Fastolf, who actually fought in the Battle of Patay against Joan of Arc. On the other hand, Stephen Greenblatt speculates that Shakespeare might have based the character of Falstaff on Robert Greene, who had in fact called Shakespeare an upstart crow. In all instances, Falstaff tries to refrain himself from everything that is serious or heroic, but he manages to come up with so many different stories that actually depict himself to be a brave knight. In both parts of Henry IV, Falstaff actually aligns himself as a very close friend of Prince Hal, who later becomes Henry V. But Falstaff is actually known for his vulgar as well as licentious puns, and at the same time his relationship with a prostitute named Doll Tearsheet. To Falstaff, honor is just another word which cannot be taken seriously, and we can generally say that this is pretty much the defining feature of his entire character. In Henry IV Part 2, we find that Falstaff is becoming very sick and as a result, in Henry V, we find a description or a eulogy that is read in honor of Falstaff's death. Whenever we think of Falstaff, we cannot neglect his loyal sidekick Pistol. Ancient Pistol or Ensign Pistol is the swaggerer who enters the Boar's Head Tavern and starts a fight with Falstaff in Henry IV Part 2. Pistol along with Corporal Nym are trusted members of Falstaff's entourage. Along with Falstaff, you would also find Pistol to be a recurring character in Shakespearean drama, because you would also find him as a character in the drama The Merry Wives of Windsor. When Falstaff decides to seduce Mistress Page and Mistress Ford, both Corporal Nym and Pistol think that it is something that is beneath their station to do, and that is why they decide to turn him in, and Falstaff gets his due punishment. We soon come to learn that in Henry V, Mistress Quickly is the one whom Ancient Pistol actually marries after the death of Falstaff. Pistol is considered to be a very interesting character, and that is why we also find him in another play by William Kernick called Falstaff's Wedding. Are you familiar with the phrase ghost at the feast? Like all valuable contributions to the English language, Shakespeare is also responsible for creating this unique idiom. You can find this popular line in the fourth scene of the third act in the drama Macbeth. In this scene, Banquo returns as a ghost who is only seen by Macbeth as the banquet is going on. Even in the beginning of the play, we are introduced to how Macbeth and Banquo were allies who fought side by side much valiantly and honorably. But things take a very dangerous turn when both Banquo and Macbeth meet the three weird sisters. The three witches claim that Macbeth will become king, but on the other hand, except from Banquo, all his descendants will become the rulers of the nation. Banquo can be seen as a completely contrasting character to Macbeth. He is very loyal to Macbeth even when he knows that he was the one who actually killed the king. The same loyalty cannot be found in Macbeth's part, because he orders three assassins to actually kill both Banquo and his son Fleance. But to Macbeth's displeasure, Fleance escapes, but Banquo is murdered. Banquo appears as a ghost in another scene when the three witches actually show Banquo's descendants being the rulers of the nation to Macbeth in a vision. This vision, as well as the prophecy that is found throughout the play that alludes to Banquo's descendants becoming the rulers of the nation, is quite important during that particular point of time. Because during the time of Shakespeare writing this play, it was actually James I was ruling the nation. And James I was actually claimed as one of the descendants of Banquo himself, who is apparently a real historical figure quite loyal to King Duncan. Shakespeare actually modeled the character of Banquo based on the descriptions that were found in Holinshed's Chronicles. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are comic figures uniquely characterized by William Shakespeare. They are the childhood friends and schoolmates of Hamlet, who are actually recruited by Claudius to spy on him. The scene in which Rosencrantz and Guildenstern meet with Hamlet actually paves the way for one of the most important monologues in the entire drama. It is only in this particular soliloquy that Shakespeare actually comes up with one of the most fascinating quotes in English literature, and that would be, "What a piece of work is man." Even though these characters are quite flat in their development, they are given the duty of escorting Hamlet to England, where he will be presumably assassinated for killing Polonius. But later on, we come to the understanding that both Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. The very same characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, are taken as the central characters in the drama Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. This is written by Tom Stoppard, one of the most popular dramatists of what would be absurdist drama. In Tom Stoppard's play, both these characters are found to be quite unaware of their situation in the entire narrative. Many scholars have found a close resemblance between Tom Stoppard's play with Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, where Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are often compared with the characters like Vladimir and Estrogen. W.S. Gilbert is another dramatist who actually used the material of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in his own drama entitled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Among all the various supernatural creatures that you find in Western narratives, Puck has a peculiar place in the English literary scene. Puck is presented as one of Oberon's favorite servants in the drama A Midsummer Night's Dream. Puck is the one who actually turns Nick's head into a donkey under the orders of Oberon. He is depicted as quite the mischievous character who pulls various pranks on other characters in the drama, but his heart is quite pure without any ulterior motive or intention to hurt anyone. Puck's real name is Robin Goodfellow and he is described as a merry wanderer of the night. Shakespeare gives this particular fairy so much importance that Puck is the one who actually ends the drama A Midsummer Night's Dream through his epilogue. You'll also be interested to know that Puck is also used by Rudyard Kipling in his novel Puck of Pook's Hill. In this work, the title character Puck is actually born when the play A Midsummer Night's Dream is actually played 3 times in Midsummer's Eve. If we take into account all the interesting personages created by William Shakespeare, we cannot dismiss the importance of Dogberry, the self-satisfied night constable. He is a pivotal character in the drama Much Ado About Nothing, where he is the head of the police group in Messina. His ideas are comic as well as sarcastic, and we can even say that Shakespeare might have used the character of Dogberry to launch his own attack on the upholders of law in the 16th century. His misinformed utterances are called Dogberryisms, and he has a memorable place among all the Renaissance characters under the category of comic personages. On the onset, you may say that Dogberry is a shallow and vain character, but it is he who unveils the plot by Don John that clears Hero's name. We all know how Shakespeare comes up with this unique set of clowns and jesters as well as fools who are often proven to be prophetic as well as wise in their utterances throughout his dramas. Fest is a typical fool found in the household of Lady Olivia. He is known for his comic episodes that involve other servants in the very same household where he serves Lady Olivia through his performances of comic relief. Throughout the play, we find him being referred to as either clown or fool. It is only once in the entire drama that we get a line where the name Fest is actually mentioned. Scholars as well as general Shakespearean audience cannot dismiss the popularity of the episode Gulling of Malvolio, where Fest actually disguises himself as Sir Topaz to play a very interesting trick on Malvolio. Friar Lawrence is perhaps one of the lesser known characters of William Shakespeare's plays, but he plays a very crucial role in the unveiling of the entire plot of Romeo and Juliet. Throughout the play, Friar Lawrence plays the role of an advisor both to Romeo and Juliet in order to accomplish their unison in marriage. Shakespeare proves himself to be a master craftsman because the lines uttered by Friar Lawrence also take note of his own interest in growing plants that have medicinal quality, which proves to be a turning point in the climax of the drama Romeo and Juliet. It is quite disheartening to know that Friar Lawrence actually abandons the couple when things really get out of hand and become irreparable. The entire atmosphere of the play turns eerie when the three witches or the weird sisters make their way onto the stage. Shakespeare actually presents the three witches in the first scene of the play, Macbeth. They are the instigators who actually propel the entire drama forward. When they come across Macbeth and his loyal friend Banquo, they prophesy that Macbeth will become the king of Scotland. It is strongly suggested that Shakespeare might have modelled these three witches as the Elizabethan version to the three fates who play a very prominent role in Greek mythology. It is also likely that Shakespeare might have taken the sources for the three witches from Holinshed's Chronicles, and another important fact would be that the three witches are also described as the wayward sisters in the first folio. The three witches are quite influential throughout the entire course of English literature because you can even find an allusion to the three witches in Samuel Beckett's drama Come and Go.